Okay, welcome to the Lucro masterclass, strategic scheduling, how to maximize your schedule and maximize your revenue. This is a massive topic that Adam and I have gotten questions about from doctors all the time. And really the premise draws from my original location. I scaled to 5.5 million in only 1,800 square feet. And a lot of doctors that we talk to think they need a bigger space at a faster pace than is actually necessary. And oftentimes doctors have constraints and they don't fully understand where this constraint is. Is it in the team? Is it in your hours? Is it in the actual space? Is it in some of the equipment? There's different factors that go into maximizing a schedule for revenue and appointment types and all the different resources that I'm going to break down in today's masterclass. But this is massively important. If you want to scale and grow, if you've ever heard me talk, almost any time, I'm always talking about understanding your percentage of schedule filled or your capacity, and that's directly tied into your schedule. And so first and foremost, you have to understand your schedule first and foremost, which we calculate with doctors all the time. If you don't understand your percentage of schedule filled, you have to watch the 5X Your Revenue Masterclass. We can get that dropped in the chat. If you haven't watched that, it's one of our most watched masterclasses where we break down how to calculate your capacity and understand where you're actually at. And what we found is that the average clinic is only about 20% of the capacity they're paying for. And so that's why it's called 5X Your Revenue, because we found most clinics can actually generate 5 times more revenue with the current hours, current space, and current team not changing at all. And so if that's mind-blowing and saying, oh, I'm going to do $1 million this year and I could keep most all expenses the same next year and do $5 million, you're probably like, how do I actually go about doing that? So that's why I'm going to break down some of the nuances of maximizing your schedule in this masterclass. So let's just jump right in. I want to start off with this caveat. This isn't one size fits all exactly how my schedule is going to be done or your schedule or Dusty's or anybody else I see, live in this masterclass. There's going to be different nuances based on the different resources that you have available or the different appointment types, the different team members, skill sets, and so forth, how your team members progress through training, able to do different activities, the length of time. There's lots of different variables. So again, I'm going to talk, and how I progress, how I scaled my clinic. You're going to have to make some tweaks based on some individualized circumstances. But when you look at your schedule, it really depends on these 3 things. First and foremost, right? You're looking at the stage that you're in, the goals, that you want to accomplish, and then the resources at your disposal. So we're going to break each of those down. And so I'm going to walk through the evolution of your schedule, what your resources are, your appointment types. We're going to go through a whole topic on block scheduling and really understanding how you actually have to maximize your schedule, minimize wasted time in your schedule. And then we actually have created a phenomenal calculator that you guys are going to get to create with Google Sheets. Okay, so if you're not at a laptop or a computer or desktop, I would highly recommend transitioning to that now, because once we get to that part, it's a workshop part of this masterclass where we're actually going to help you walk through this entire process live during this masterclass. So first and foremost, like I said, the evolution framework. You really need to think of it depending on what stage you're in, right? And so if you are a solo doctor, your scheduling is going to be a lot differently than if you have multiple doctors or associates versus, if you're in my position where the business is running without you and you're the CEO. So there's different evolutions and different stages of scheduling. And so I'm going to walk through those evolutions today. But we really need to talk about what your core resources are and how you arrange them, right? As I stated earlier, you're really looking at these core variables: your hours, that's your open, your team, who's on your team, what skills, talents, abilities, what appointment types can they handle, what certifications do they have to handle those appointment types, right? They have to be a doctor to do adjustments, so forth. What rooms do you have in your clinic? And then what also equipment, do you have that could, bottleneck either a room or a team? And so at the end of the day, you could have all the hours in the world and you only got 1 team member, then you can't, do that all. You could have all the space in the world, but if you don't have the team, then you're going to have might have a team bottleneck, right? Might have tons of team members, but you got too small of a space, right? So there's going to be some limiting factor in these different areas. And so you need to be able to identify what that limiting factor is in the different area so that you know exactly where to focus on. That's why I talk about so much. When you understand percentage of schedule filled and your actual capacity and where your bottlenecks are, then you always know who the next hire is, when you need to hire them, when you need to invest more into marketing, when you need to make most of your major decisions. It's all dictated around your percentage of schedule filled, what appointment types are getting maximized, which ones are not getting maximized. It tells you so many answers to so many questions that people have. So we're going to walk through, like I said, in the workshop, what are all your core appointments that you have in your office? But there's going to be some variance, right? So, so let's say if it's a husband and wife coming in, instead of doing two separate appointment types, maybe instead of just one 60-minute appointment, you make one 90-minute appointment, right? Or if someone is a personal injury case, maybe you have slightly different examinations that you have to do. Or if somebody, is coming in pregnant, you're not going to take x-rays, so maybe that appointment can be shorter, right? So there is some variance that can happen. Again, like I said, this isn't a one size fits all, but I want to know that those all can be accounted for. And then each of those different appointment types, what are the resources required? Is, as far as space, as far as equipment to do the initial appointment, as far as team members that are able to do those specific appointments. And so really getting down to the nitty gritty, what we want to map out is proper block scheduling. And so block scheduling is where you're really maximizing your time and your team's time. And so oftentimes what I found observing lots of offices, when I was a student, I went to over 50 different offices around the country and tried to learn and to grow my own clinic before I opened. And even offices that I've been to these days, I see lots of wasted time where doctors are doing a couple adjustments here, then they got downtime, then they go take an X-ray here, then they go do a day one, then they got a couple more adjustments, then they have downtime, then they have another adjustment, then they have downtime, and it's just not a very maximized schedule, and it's very difficult to do deep work, to do higher level CEO activities when you only have 1 minute here, 2 minutes here, 5 minutes there. And so then you end up with a lot of wasted time, right? And so you need to be able to constrict your schedule down to force cluster booking, and I'm going to walk through that, okay? So what I want to jump into right away is just a solo doc example, and this is actually my own office when I first opened, when it was just me, all right, and a couple team members and my wife when we started off, brand new, right out of school. This was the office hours for my clinic. So we're only open about 18 hours a week for actual patient-facing hours, right? And so in between those hours, that's when I was doing marketing, HR, operations, training, hiring, and so forth. And so I'm going to walk you through an example, further on, is that oftentimes your hours, are actually way too much for a lot of doctors, and you have all this dead time inside your hours. Or inside your hours, you don't have cluster booking, so you might, be open for, let's say, 20 hours a week, but to see all the appointments you're currently seeing, it might only take 10 hours a week. So now you have 10 hours of dead time inside of your own schedule because you got wasted time here, wasted time there. Give me some comments in the chat if you guys are resonating with what I'm saying and understanding, where you've been there, especially maybe earlier on when your clinic was slower and you had an adjustment, on the hour, and then you got done, and then you had to wait 5 minutes for the next adjustment, and then you had to wait 2 minutes for the next thing, and then you had to wait 10 minutes in this, and you're just constantly up, down, up, down. You never get in a smooth rhythm of flow, right? And so we want to be in a smooth rhythm of flow. We want to have efficiency. We want to be able to continue to grow and scale, okay? And then, like I said, if you're not seeing patients, then you have that time blocked off appropriately so that you can work on marketing, so that you can work on hiring team members and building out your SOPs and your operations and training and all these other activities that you have to do if you want to grow and scale, right? So this was, my schedule. And so what I want to have you guys start thinking about is your own schedule first and foremost. Then I'm going to add in team members. Then I'm going to add in associate doctors. Then I'm out in multiple associate doctors. I'm going to walk through this flow. Again, like I said, this isn't going to be a one size fits all. If you have any questions about this whole process, if you've ever been on one of these, we answer unlimited questions at the end of all your questions that you have. So please put those in the chat while I'm going. But first and foremost, think about it like this. This was my schedule. So as I stated with you earlier, this was my hours, right? So 10 to noon, 3 to 6. So what this means is on the hour at 10 a.m., from 10 a.m. to 10:15, okay, a.m., I would schedule adjustments. Okay, so our schedule is in 15-minute blocks. Some people do 10-minute blocks, some people do 5-minute blocks. Our EHR, that's the only thing it could do is 15-minute blocks. So on the hour, every hour, 10 a.m., 11 a.m., 3, I would actually do them at 12 p.m. as well, 3 p.m., 4 p.m., 5 p.m., 6 p.m., Okay. And on the 30-minute mark, 10:30, 11:30, 3:30, 4:30, 5:30, okay, I would have 15-minute blocked off for adjustments. Okay. And so at that point, I was like, just load up the schedule, if that's when they work, just put as many adjustments in as you could, but ideally you really want to have, you know, how many adjustments can you handle per that time slot? So right now, the way we do it is we know our doctors on average can adjust about 4 adjustments per 15 minutes. And so without getting too complicated, we even know our show up rate for adjustments is typically around 80 to 85%. And so if we want 4 adjustments to show up at that time, we need to schedule typically 5 adjustments. And so with our current schedule, we schedule 5 adjustments every 15, minutes per doctor. So if this was me, for example, and let's say that's what I was doing, then on that 10 o'clock time, I could schedule up to five adjustments could be scheduled. Okay, knowing about 4 of them are going to show up so that I can fill that full 15-minute slot, right? And so again, you got to figure that out. What is your slots? How many people can you see during that time slot? And then you want to fill that, right? Because let's just say I had this completely open, then I might have 2 people at 10 o'clock, one person at 10:15, 4 people at 10:30, whatever it might be. But by blocking it down, I was scheduling no adjustments at the 15 to 30-minute mark, no adjustments from the 45 to 60-minute mark, right? And so this allowed me to 100%, these time slots, I was 100% adjust. So you might have to, at this point, if your schedule is too spread out, that's going to be one of the number one things that you might need to do is you actually might need to constrict your times down. Maybe your total hours, again, still look the same, but inside those hours, adjustments are only scheduled on the hour and the 30-minute mark, right? And so again, we're going to give you a little bit better understanding of what that is based on the worksheet and that we're going to walk through in a little bit, okay? But really think about it from this framework. Then from the 15 to 30-minute mark, that's when I did the day twos. We call them PROFs, or progress report findings. After they finish their initial care plan, they transition into corrective or wellness care. And then any other special type of appointments, whether it's a financial, someone's, thinking about stopping care, whether it's just an additional conversation that you need to have, there could be all different other that could fall in this, what I just called special appointments, for ease of simplicity, right? And then in between, for my own schedule, I'd helping take x-rays, analyze x-rays, I jump into day ones and do day one touch points and examinations, and then I do administrative work. So if this slot, let's say, wasn't 100% full, then these are my secondary or free-flowing duties that I would fall back to first and foremost, right? And so then the goal is to ideally maximize this, right? And then you slowly expanding your hours or changing things around, and then obviously hiring people to start helping with those more of those CEO duties. Because right now, the way my schedule's set up, I had 3-hour block in here, 3-hour block in here, 3-hour, 2-3 hours before we open. Big day. When Tuesday we do all of our training, we still do Friday closed. So that's where I was doing all of that marketing, HR, operations training. I was trying to do 2 health talks a day. I would try and do a health talk at 8 a.m., then go to the office. Then I try and do another health talk, typically about 1 o'clock. After my first shift, go do another health talk, come back to the office. I was the one that was setting those all up myself as well, right? So again, there's going to be variables based on what you do, what team members you have. So let's go into the team members, right? So let's say you have 2 team members, right? And they're doing day ones, and that takes 30 minutes of that team member's time. Then this first team member is doing day ones on the hour. This team member is doing day ones on the 30-minute mark, right? And so I need to come in and do the day one exam, right? But depending on how long the consultation happened, the history, how long it took them to fill out the paperwork, I don't know exactly when that's going to happen, And so could happen somewhere in the middle of this adjusting block, and I just run in there, for a 5-minute, exam touch point, or it could happen right before I do a day 2 or right after I come out of day 2. Maybe they had to wait for me, a few minutes, coming out of a day 2 to then jump in there and do that day 1 exam, or take those x-rays, right? And so that's where you really need to understand. It's like the day 1, maybe that person's in your office for a full hour, but they're probably only with this team member, the CA, helping do the consultation history for about 30 minutes, right? And then the other team member can do reevaluations, So our reevaluations, the way we've always done them is just every 12 visits went during their adjustment, right? So those aren't, as perfectly scheduled. It's just on that 12th, 24th, 36th, adjustment. But those are always happening, like I said, on the hour and, on the 30-minute mark, right? So you have the team member on the hour and on the 30-minute mark. That can help with reevaluations for that whole 30 minutes. Again, like I said, if you don't have a day two on your schedule, if you don't have a prof on your schedule, if it's not a day one, then free flowing help or secondary duties, that person has downtime tasks or secondary tasks to go to. So that's very important, that you have that set up. That's something that we always have for all of our team members is, hey, these are your primary responsibilities. These are secondary, and downtime tasks that they can also help out with as well. Now, I put a little variable in here. Maybe you also do decompression or soft wave or other services that you need a team member or a rehab tech or whatever it may be to be involved with in those other duties. So like I said, that schedule could be slightly different, again, based on your appointment types, based on your team members, different services that you offer in your office. These are going to be slightly different. Like I said, we'll have a whole calculator we'll share here in a second that you guys can build your own custom flow. Okay, that's a solo doc. If you have any questions on that, if you're a solo doc and you're like, okay, what do I do next? Specific questions, put those in the chat right now, okay? Because I want to be able to answer that. It's a very, very vital time. If you want to grow, you have to understand how to maximize your schedule the most right now to get to that associate doc, to get to multiple associates, to advance all the way to a CEO of your company. It's a progression. But if you can't get off the ground to begin with, how are you ever going to get to the next level heights that you want to go to, right? So please ask questions if you have solo docs in the chat, in the Q&A. That's a very, very important stage to really understand and maximize, because you're wearing so many hats, right? You're doing marketing, you're doing sales, you're doing operation, you're doing finance, you're doing hiring, you're doing the adjustments, you're taking the x-rays, you're doing the administrative, you might be cleaning the office, you're running payroll, you're doing all these things. So it's so much more important at that stage than the other stages. That's the most critical stage. Your time is so valuable. Okay. It's so important. So please ask questions about that so that I can help you understand and map that out as best as possible. And now we're going to jump in to the next level. And even if you don't have an associate, this is really help you understand how you're going to start to progress, because this is a mistake I made. You can see the schedule now is different. When I first was opening, I opened 18 hours a week. The schedule was built for me. I needed Fridays off to do sales, marketing, operations, hiring, training, SOPs, go to conferences, do all these other things. But then you hire an associate doc, and the biggest mistake I see all the time is doctors just keep those same hours that they built for themselves as a solo doc, owner, operator, all in one. Then they bring in an associate doctor, right? And then they're only open for 15, 18, 20, 22 hours of actual patient care. And you're paying this doctor a full-time $100,000 a year salary, and they're only doing what a doctor can do 18 to 20 hours a week, right? So that's a huge, huge issue as far as running a profitable business, right? So that's why you really need to understand this framework that you need to transition to, with that first associate, with associates in general, right? You hire doctors for them to be doctors, right? Even for yourself, if you're a solo doc, or even if you have associates, you want anything that a doctor doesn't have to do, or anything that you can do without being a doctor, you want somebody at a lower pay rate, ideally, to do those activities, right? You want to delegate and elevate not only yourself, but your top level and especially top paid employees as well, right? So this is our current schedule that we operate in. Monday, we're open 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., 3 to 6, 7 to 4, 9 to 6 Thursday, and Friday, 7 to 1. Okay. We also have just a slight nuance on Tuesdays. We will have some morning hours where we have a split shift. But like I said, this is how it would be my first transition, and then maybe add Tuesday mornings. The reason we did that is we wanted a lot of people start out at 3 times a week. We want to offer 3 mornings and at least 3 evenings for people. So if they say, I want to come 7 a.m. 3 times a week, you have 3 days that they can come at 7 a.m. If they want to come at 5:30, 6 o'clock, you have 3 afternoons as well. So you need to have the appropriate flow, like I said, to maximize. You're paying full-time people, you need to be working full time, right? And so with this, you don't have to close for lunches. You have an associate doctors, you can have an alternating lunch, or they take a lunch at one time, you take a lunch at another time. That's a big mistake. I've seen it a lot as well. Is it takes a lot of energy to close the office and reopen the office, right? There's closing duties, there's opening duties. You got to lock the door. People are coming in, and you have that window at the end of a shift where it's not very efficient. You got like one straggler, still in the office. Multiple people have to stay and stick around and delay their lunch because of that one straggler that's asking extra questions, or it's taking a little bit long, or they didn't get their paperwork done, or it took them too long to get their paperwork done. Right? You're just literally creating a lot more of that every single day when you have these multiple shifts. Right? So as best as possible, you really want to eliminate that closed shift over lunch as soon as you possibly can, because it's going to create massive improvements in your efficiency of your office. Okay, so now let's jump into, now we have the owner schedule, and then now we have an associate schedule on top of this. So this is the exact same schedule, right, that I showed you earlier when you're a solo doc. I'm adjusting, on the hour, the 30-minute marks, then I'm doing day two's progress report findings, and any special appointments, okay? And then I'm also doing the x-rays, day one exams, administrative, right? And the nuance now is now you have someone else to help you, right? So now this person, the green, is new things coming in, right? So you have an associate doc, they're going to start taking over adjustments, and they can also start helping out with x-rays, day one exams, any admin, things in between tasks, marking up x-rays, creating care plans, doing notes, whatever it may be. But here's the first thing. Now you're starting to give some adjustments over to that new associate doctor. And again, maybe you want to do adjustments all day long. Maybe that's your favorite thing to do. Maybe you'd rather hand off day twos. Maybe you'd rather hand off other appointment types. That's totally fine. Again, this isn't one size fit all. What do you love to do? What do you feel like you're the best at? What do you want to delegate, elevate? What is in that thing, that top quadrant that you're great at and you love to do? You need to decide that for your own self. So now adjustments, now you're kind of more secondarily up for adjustments. This is the primary person. Adjustments have moved to secondary. Okay, next progression. Now this person's getting fully up to speed. They're getting more efficient. They're doing a better job. They're at full speed. Now you can remove one of your adjusting slots, and now you can do additional day two progress fortifying special coded appointments, right? Then they're getting even better. Now they can start helping with profs, special coded appointments, and you can open a new slot for CEO activities, right? You're still doing adjustments as a free-flowing help. You're a backup, overflow, right? This associate could be sick, you might have to step in. They could be behind, you're still jumping in, as needed. So it's not like a golden, hey, this block is 100% set in gold that it can't be interrupted, right? There's nuances where you have to still be flexible, right, at this point, right? Then let's say you get another associate, right? So now you can do more CEO activities. Now this associate one, like I said, they're in addition to doing day two, in addition to doing profs, one time per hour, maybe they do 2 slots per hour, right? And so then this person can start doing adjustments. Now, with the blue, what you're seeing is, okay, x-rays are no longer on your plate, right? Those have moved over with associate 2. He can handle the backup x-rays. They can handle the day one backup day one exams. You don't got to help with those anymore, right? So again, do what you want to do. Maybe those aren't things you want to hand off. Maybe there's other admin or other things that you want to hand off. That's what you need to decide. But again, you're starting to slowly delegate and elevate continually to the next step as you continue to progress through this scheduling and advancement and maximizing your schedule and your time, right? Okay, now you've traded off some day twos off your plate. Now associate 1 has been with you for a while. They've gotten better. You've been training them now for X amount of time. Now they can start doing day twos, right? And then now this associate 2, now they can start doing progress report kind of findings. They know the patients better. They can start doing some of these special coded appointments. And again, now you're up, to mostly CEO activities, right? And the final progression, is you've gotten all the way to CEO activities. Now this other doctor can also do day twos in addition, right? And so now you've made this final progression, of mostly all CEO activities. Now, free-flowing help, again, depends on where you're at, where your volume is, ebbs and flows. There might be, some times where you're signing up lots of people and you're growing really quickly and you might have to jump over and help with these, or maybe your schedule gets out of whack and things, don't get scheduled properly, or things get overflow and you might have to jump in and help, right? It's not this like perfect black and white. There's a lot of gray in this entire flow. But I really want you to understand, like, this is the basic, progression, right, that you're going to go through. So, just like I said, just kind of back up the top, a quick review is you have your individual doctor schedule. You're all by yourself. You're doing everything, but you're maximizing your time. You're making sure that you don't have these adjustments, the smaller, shorter time appointments spread out over all the different amount of time. You have your team members on an appropriate schedule, depending on what type of services that you offer. Then you start to hire associate, you start handing off, some different activities, as that person progresses and has training, then they can start taking over more activities. They get more efficient. They can do higher volume, right? Then they get, better. They can do even more activities. Then you maybe hire another one, right? And it's just this continual progression until, as you can see, ideally you can get to this fully CEO level of your practice where it can fully run without you having to be there, during the day, all day long. Like I said, there's still going to be special circumstances where you might have to jump in. People are still going to be sick. They're still going to take vacation, right? And you're maybe the fill-in doc, at that time. So that's the framework. Okay. So now we're going to actually jump into a workshop. Okay. It's some amazing calculator that Adam helped me build. So we're actually going to map this all out. Okay. So as I talked about, what we're going to map out in this workshop is what are your actual hours you're seeing your patients for? What are those available resources of hours, team members, rooms, and equipment? What are all the appointment types? What types of resources do these appointment types take, right? And then what is your stage? Are you solo doc? Do you have multiple doc? What's your goal, right? So the goal we haven't dived in as much to, but like, what do you want to do? Are you just, trying to have a lifestyle practice, where you're trying to just keep the minimal number of hours, as possible. You don't want to work late in the evenings. You want to work early in the mornings. You can do whatever you want to do at that point. It's just like you're going to definitely have limitations, to growth of the business as a whole. But that's where you have to make a decision. Are you wanting to grow the business, or do you want to just stay steady and you've gotten to a point of certain income that you're saying, hey, I'm happy here and I just want to stay here and maintain it with the least amount of work as possible, right? So you got to make that decision, right? Or, on the other end, you're like, hey, I want to delegate, elevate. I want to get to that CEO role. I want my business to be able to run with me while I'm on a cruise, or are you somewhere in between, and you're like, I want to go a little slower. I don't want to push too hard. I want to have proper balance along the way. There's all different levels and you got to decide where you're at, what stage you're in, what your goals are. And so, like I said, now we're going to map out these resources: hours, people, rooms, equipment. We need to understand our core appointments, if there's any variance to those, what resources are needing for each one of them. And then figuring out where are we at right now? How many are we already seeing of each of these appointments? How long are they taking? And so we actually know exactly where our bottlenecks are and where we have the most opportunity to grow and scale. So this was the example I was saying earlier, is like, I talk with the doctors all the time. It's like they say that numbers like this: I'm doing 100 adjustments a week. My team's doing the day ones. I'm mostly doing the day twos. Those will take me about 30 minutes, 5 of those. Okay, we're at about 650 minutes. And, when you really bottle it down, they're only doing maybe 10 hours of true patient-facing time, but they're open for 20, 25 hours a week. So it's taken, they have all these little intermittent breaks and gaps and downtime where it's really creating lots of inefficiencies, right? And so if you remember my hours, like I said, I was only open for 18 hours, but my adjusting time slots were only 9 hours a week, right? So of the 18 hours I was open, I only had 9 hours of adjusting time slots so that I could maximize those times, cluster book those appointment types, and make sure that the block scheduling allowed me to maximize my CEO time as well, so that I could focus on all those other activities that I need to do as the owner to grow and scale the company. Okay, so now we're going to jump into the workshop. We have a special link that's going to get dropped right now in the Google chat that will allow you to make a copy, okay, of this spreadsheet. So this spreadsheet here is what we're going to walk through. So let's get that chat link dropped in the chat.
Okay, I've dropped it in.
There we go. So Adam just dropped that link in the chat. If you're watching this as a recording, it'll be available as a download below the video. Okay, but that link, if you click on it, it should automatically pop up Google Sheets, and it should prompt you to make a copy, okay, of this sheet. All right, now just set that to the side for 1 second. Okay, you got it pulled up now. Now we're ready to go in, but I want to make sure that you understand how to use it. So Adam, why don't you walk us through this sheet, and then I'll walk you through the example that I've already built in my own sheet.
Okay, awesome. Do you want to, Josiah, just quickly copy that link and put it up there and make a copy just so that everyone can see the, actually, no, it's fine. It's fine. I hope you can all hear me. So when we build a calculator in Google Sheets, it's important that everyone understands that there are limitations. And we want to make it accessible to everyone. So we want you to have a Google Sheet. It's accessible. You can use it. There are limitations. We can't do one thing that fits into everyone and it's perfect. So we've had to, we have to have some constraints. So we're like, okay, how do we build something that gets us a good outcome that isn't, going to necessarily cater for the 5,000 different variations that everyone has in their practice. And I just want to quickly sit on this because I think it's important when you're doing exercises like this. I've got this little theory that if you can get 80% outcome in doing something, you've probably already got 95 to 98% of the value of the thing. The extra 20%, i.e. making it perfect. You take this calculator, you do it, and you're like, it's 80% right. The other 20% that you're going to do to try and make it perfect is probably going to take you an exorbitant amount of time because you've got to build like all these new little nuances. And the likelihood is you only squeeze out another 2, 5, maybe 7% of the actual value. And I want to protect you in that. I want to say it's not about perfection. It's about using it as a tool to get a gauge of where you are. You're gonna get enough insight to then make some really good decisions. So I want to protect you from trying to make things perfect because perfect doesn't get anyone anywhere really. Just good, steady progress gets everyone everywhere. So there's a resource tab, which is the tab that Dr. Josiah is on. And this is the tab you're going to fill out in. And when you're on a Google Sheet, anything that we've ever created, this little kind of yellowy block that you see is a customized block. It means it needs information. It means you need to do something in that block in order to make this thing work. If it's yellow and there's nothing in those blocks, nothing's going to work. So just remember, yellow is like, hey, I've got some action to do. And so the top section, we've broken down the 6 days of the week, and we've given you 2 time slots where you can just put an open time and a close time. So Dr. Josiah will show you kind of in B2, there's a little whole time thing, and he's got there 10 a.m. So he clicks on 10 a.m. and then he closes at 12, and then he opens again at 3 p.m. and then at 6 p.m. And it will just show you, okay, he's open for 2 hours, then he's open for 3 hours. And then right at the bottom, it says total open hours is 18 hours. So he's given this that little calculation, and you can go in and add your time slots as you need in order to get the total time slots. Why that's the number one resource is time. You'll see how that's going to work in the rest of the time. We've got ideal open hours. That's a little block that Dr. Josiah will talk about as well in a moment. It's just, it's like, what's ideal? Like, where do you really want to be? And the reason we've got that in there so that we can show you in the summary a comparison of where you are to where you could be to kind of see a bit of a differential. So we'll talk about that in a second. If you go, okay, then below that, we've got some of our resources. So we've got team members, and you can list your team members. You can abbreviate, write the name. That's up to you. Doesn't really matter. You're going to write the team member. I would say on the team member section, only list team members that are actually doing something with a patient. Something that you're kind of charging for.
With an appointment, I would say, yeah.
An appointment, yeah. An appointment. Like what we're trying to say is you don't have to put front desk there. You've got back office people. You don't have to put them there because that's going to tie into what are they actually doing with a patient time-wise? So you don't waste your time listing people that aren't doing that. So you're going to put those team members in there, and then you're going to put your rooms and equipment. Now, because we say /equipment, how do you fit rooms and equipment in? You may have a decompression room that has 3 decompression tables in the room. So then you're going to list decompression 3 times. Okay, because that makes that because you kind of want to focus on the one decompression table, but yes, it may be in one room, but then you're going to say decompression 3 times, and you're going to see why that comes in. This is again one of those constraints, like how do you build this perfect little variable model? Okay, so you're going to either put the room in, or you can put some of the equipment that's in a room so that you can itemize each equipment, and you'll see how we're going to use that in a second. And then below that, we come to our appointment types. So you're going to list in column A, you're going to say, okay, I've got a day 1, day 2 adjustments, decomp, whatever that may be. Okay, so you're going to list all of those different appointment types. Here, stick on appointment types that actually take time. The whole purpose of this section are things that take physical time. So I'm going to spend X amount of time doing something with a patient. Okay. And then you'll put your duration in right there. There's a little drop down. It's got a bunch of variables from 1 minute, and then they go in different increments, as you'll see, all the way to, I think 2 hours or whatever. Okay. So you can put that in there. And then the column C is, what is the fee that you expect to collect from that appointment? Not what you hope to charge, what you're actually going to collect, what your expectation is of what you're, again, it's not necessarily an exact science, but okay, I'm going to do an adjustment and I expect to collect $60 for an adjustment. I'm going to do a shockwave session. I expect to collect $250. So you're going to put that in column C. And then the last section is what we call protocols. You can call them niches. You can call them, other services, whatever you want to call it, doesn't really matter. Here are things that you are selling that you could even put supplements in there, things that you're selling that don't necessarily take time, but you are collecting revenue for them. So in this example, on a day 2, you may sell a neuropathy patient. Now we've got the day 2 above, as you can see in row 34. We've got that in, because on the day 2, we may be selling a neuropathy, we may be selling a decompression, a shockwave. We could be doing all different types of selling on that. That's why we've got it at 0 value on the top. And we've just listed all the different things we could sell. It's not going to take any more time, but that's the value. And then we can just put volume in when we get down to selling those different components. And again, in the example that Dr. Zai walks through, you will understand how to work that. The important part is on this resource tab, you just got to fill it out. So just fill it out as much as you can, get as much information into it as much as you can, because that's your kind of like if you're building Lego, you're going to put all the pieces out in front of you. That's what you're doing. You're kind of putting all the pieces out in front of you. I know everything that I'm going to use right now, and then we can go and start building. Okay. So that's that part. Dr. Zai, did I miss anything?
No, you're spot on.
Okay. Then we've got the next 2 tabs is what we call team member capacity and room capacity. So this is the 2 major variables that are going to exist when we are trying to allocate now. So now we're trying to allocate time, and we look at it as you're either allocating time across a team member or you're allocating time across a room. Now, the best calculator in the world would have a blend of both, of course. So it's like some mix of, okay, room and team member. Very, very hard to build. If you've ever tried to build something in Google Sheets, something that's going to be user-friendly across the thing, it's a little bit more challenging. So we realized building them in 2 separate versions is going to be a lot more user-friendly and get us a better outcome. So what happens is it will now automatically list all your team members. So in this example, we've got owner, CA1, and CA2. So it's going to list them. If you had more, as you scroll down, you'll list, it will just, in that block, it will just list each team member. And now we've got a series of slots that we can now start allocating to that team member. There it is. So if he puts in there a test, you'll come through there, it will show test. So you'll see how that will work that way. Okay. And so if I go to the team member section, I'll go back up to the owner, and it's going to say, okay, now what appointments is the owner going to do? And then there's a nice drop down that you're going to have, and you click on the drop down, and it's pulling your list of appointments that you just made on the other side. So it's pulling that list. That's why we just fill it in once. You choose the appointment. Okay. I'm going to say what usually day 2. Okay. So I'm going to say day 2. How much of the time of the doctor do we want that doctor spending on a day 2? We're going to put it in. We're saying in this example, it's 40%, adjustments 45, x-rays 10, financial 5. That's just what we put in. Again, Dr. Starr will talk a little bit about the detail. Because you've now filled in all the yellow parts there, the calculation does the rest. It tells you how much time they've spent on that over the course of that week. This is all by week. Just everyone note, all of these metrics are by week. Okay, it's the easiest way to do it. Just what is happening in a 1 week cycle. We'll then extrapolate them out to a month in a moment. So, and then in your fee, that's how much you're going to generate from doing those sessions. That's what the fee for an X-ray is 150. How many slots have you got? How much is your total time? And then you got your slots. How many slots? So in this case, this doc is going to do 97 slots on adjustments. They're going to spend 8 hours of their week on adjustments, 7 hours on day 2s, 1 hour and 45 minutes on X-rays. And we expect them to collect about $5,820 from adjustments because they're going to do 97 adjustments at $60. Okay, there's the income. So you can see the doc then should be generating about $6,800 in revenue. The CA, won't go into the details, those components should be generating about $3,900 if they do it in that mix. And the other CA should be generating about $3,100 if they do it in that mix. Okay, we're using percentage Then column B, percentage split. So we're saying what percentage of the time are you spending on those different areas? Just quickly change one of them to like bigger, like 50%. You'll get a nice little error. That can happen. Just make sure it's a percentage. Just write 50 in it because it's already formatted as a 50. Yeah. Okay, you'll see, so at the top it says overfill. So you'll see a big red pops up. Hey, you've allocated too much time. You've allocated 110% of time. You can't do that. So that's not going to work. If you change that to maybe 20, you'll see it's got some nice variations there. It's going to say, hey, underutilized. Like you're only allocating 20%, 80% of this person's time. We should try and allocate a little bit more. That's just going to help you try and get to filled as much as you can. But you can also go back and kind of play around with where they are right now and kind of see what percentage they are. There's a little bit of a dynamic nature there for you to play around with that. Okay, so that's the rooms. That's the team members. Then if you go to the room, it's exactly the same. Okay, so you just hide column D, sorry, that team member thing, it's arbitrary. It's now exactly the same. You're just doing it by the room. So again, it's going to list, so A1, exam room 1, we've listed all the exam rooms, all the equipment, exam room 2 and the x-ray, the adjustment room. So it's going to list each room, and you're going to do the exact same thing that you did for the team member. You're just now going to list what's happening in that room. Okay, so day 1, day 2, re-exams, what percentage, and then the rest of it works exactly the same way as what the team member. We're just using the variable as the room. And like what Dr. Josiah did earlier, if you have, let's say, 3 decompression tables, you may say decompression 1, 2, and 3, then they will just show up there. Decompression 1, 2, and 3. Okay. And then you'll just have, as you scroll down on the room 1, you'll see there'll be some decompression room. There'll be decompression 1, and then 2, and then 3. They'll be listed there. And then you can just fill in each room or decompression table, in this case, that piece of equipment. If we did it 100%, what would that look like? It's the easiest way for us to get that outcome. Okay. Am I missing anything there, Dr. Josiah?
Nope.
Okay. Again, column H just tells you how much revenue you could generate in that week from that particular room if it's at max capacity. Then what we have at the end of it is a summary. And the summary just puts it all together. Now, I think we should leave the summary. I think you should walk yourself through the example, and then you can then explain the summary, which will put it all together in the actual numbers. I think that will make a lot more sense.
Okay, let's do it. All right. So as Adam said, put in your hours up here. That'll get your total open patient-facing hours that you see at patients for. All right, and the ideal open is what I was talking about earlier. That's that transition that you need to make, from a solo doc to having associate doctors to maximize, the salary of a doctor, as best as possible. Like I said, we are big on closing the office down for training. You also need the doctor to come in, 30 minutes, at minimum before a shift, to get prepped and ready. Doctor might have to stay, another 15 to 30 minutes after a shift, wrapping up. So, you can't have 40 open hours, because then they would have to show up, the exact minute the office opens, and the minute the office closes. We know that's not going to be perfect with patients, showing up or talking longer, or things going, not 100% perfect, so that's where you want to account for those additional hours that they're going to be working where the office will not be open. So that's where I have this 32 in here. Like Adam said, we're going to come back to that here when I get to the summary, is understanding like how could you hit better capacity in your space if you have those ideal hours maximized, as well as the rooms and the team members. So as Adam already said, fill these in, very basic of what you have for team members and rooms. If you guys have any questions, on how to fill in these in, just drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to that. And then as Adam said, this is the basic framework for the appointment types. And then, the thing that we were trying to figure out is this variable here, the day 2, depending on if you offer multiple different services in your office, depending on what your close rate or your sign up rate or your retention rate, right? There's all these other secondary KPIs that we're not, we're focusing strictly just on scheduling at this time, that are not factored into this sheet. And so that's why we created these separate functions, down here, more of this, utilizing this. Day 2 takes a certain amount of time, it takes a specific room, and it takes a specific team member, but the outcome of that could be variable, again, based on the protocol or, exactly what is being done in that room. So as Adam already walked through getting this filled out, this is just an estimate. If you're going off of, my slide deck earlier, like I said, I had it in as special appointments in here, financial, another variable, like I said, if someone is potentially thinking about, has extra questions about finances, or the questions about insurance, or they're thinking about dropping out of care, having time available, to have those conversations, but that's kind of, like I said, I think, you might have a lot of those other little minor appointment, types like that. Like I said, I would just call it financial or special or something, more basic, just be all encompassing, for some of those little appointment types that aren't happening nearly as often. And then again, different team members, are they involved depending on different services that you offer? Where are they at? Or maybe you have specific team members that are dedicated and all they do is the decomp room, or all they do is the shockwave, right? So again, those can be mapped out, as needed depending on how many team members you have and where they're at. But again, this capacity is of the percentage of hours open, right? So, again, if you're only open for 18 hours and a team member is working 40 hours, the majority of their admin, duties are obviously happening at non-open patient hours, right? But they still might have to do some admin things, during the shift, maybe immediately after they do a day one for a team member, then they need to maybe enter something into the EHR, or maybe they, are involved with verifying the insurance, or they're involved with double checking the paperwork, or there's some other, secondary duties. Again, like I was showing earlier, in the scheduling for the team members, there's some secondary duties that you might want to account for, because they're not going to be able to do 100% day ones, 100%. There's going to be a little bit of a buffer based on some of those administrative activities that go along with those appointment types. And then for the rooms, again, similarly, you're mapping out ideal. Ideally, if you're maxing out your space that you already have, how would you have these proportionate? So the way I'm looking at that is this, it's like, hey, if a day one's taking that room up for an hour, like I said, maybe it only takes 30 minutes of a team member's time, but maybe they're in the room for a whole hour because there's a consultation, there's a history, and then the doctor comes in, does an examination. The person maybe has to gown up, right? So maybe one team member takes 30 minutes, another time they're in the room for 15 minutes by themselves, and another team member's in there for 15 minutes, but they're in the room for a total hour. Again, those are those different variables that sometimes doctors don't forget. And that's where you can have lots of scheduling chaos. So depending on how you split up these rooms, again, you're trying to maximize for how many slots are available. So let's just say for day ones, for example, to put this into practicality, right now we have the availability or capacity from a room standpoint to do 18 day ones a week, right? So you're like, okay, I definitely want to maximize that. That's my room capacity, right? If you go over here, that's where I was like, okay, well, I want my team members to be available because day ones are obviously, that's the gas, the fuel for your business to keep growing. So I want to make sure that the team members are also available for the same amount of room capacity slots. Okay. So when you're mapping yours out, you really want to understand, like I said, first and foremost, you're going to want to fill this out, what's actually happening, right? And then you're going to see, oh, that's where there's bottlenecks because I have, all the room capacity, but I don't have the team capacity, right? And so again, when you're filling this out for yourself, start with where you're at right now, and then we can help you calculate. And that's what this summary is for, as Adam mentioned, to know exactly how do you get to ideal. So, right here is the actual numbers where you can put those in, right? And so right now, let's just say in this hypothetical, practice example, they're doing 10-day ones, a week, 8 of those are coming back for day 2. They're doing 100 adjustments, 25 decompressions. There's about 8 re-exams, 8 x-rays, 8 financial or those special appointments, 8 admin, blocks, and, 8 progress report of findings, right? So that's what's actually happening. And so based off of all of that added up, you can see this practice, with some also additional protocols being sold, in those day 2s, at a 0 time block, those added up this practice is generating $30,000 a week or $132,000 a month. So now we want to go to the left and understand, okay, that's what the reality is. What is possible? What's actually possible for this practice? Okay. Now we're going back to team member capacity. So it's pulling these numbers, okay, of what's actually possible. Okay. If these team members are at ideal spots, then instead of 10 day ones, we could have 18. Instead of 8 day twos, we could have 14. Okay. And it looks like we're maybe a little over the top on the adjustments. We're pretty much at capacity, for the adjustments right now. Decompressions, okay, we're at capacity. Okay, we could do it, we're at capacity for some of these things, right? So it depends on where it is, but overall, and also we could get our sign up rate a little bit better. Maybe we could sign up one more neuropathy, maybe two more of each of these. So from a team member capacity, we have the ability to generate $56,000 a week or $244,000 a month. So you're looking at almost twice as much potential revenue of the team members you're already paying. So again, this is maximizing the team members you already have. This you still have all the same expenses. These team costs are not any less over here, even though you're generating, $112,000 less per month. This is again percentage of schedule filled capacity calculator. This is why it's so important. Whether your schedule is 100% full or 50% full, most all your expenses are exactly the same. So again, that's why it's so vital to understand, well, where is the bottleneck? Is it a team bottleneck? Okay. Is it a room bottleneck? Okay, like I said, or maybe it's an hours issues. You're maxing these out, but it's like, hey, if you were open instead of 18 hours, a week, but you're open for 32 hours a week, holy cow, then with the exact same team, if I expanded the hours, then I could go from $56,000 a week to $70,000 a week, $307,000, right? So you're looking at exact same team, okay? Ideally, if let's just, I don't know if if they're working $40, 40 hours a week here, but they're doing all these other secondary tasks that are not revenue generating tasks versus fully maximized hours for productivity, $30,000 to $56,000 to $70,000 a week. Okay, change 132 to 244 to $300,000 a month, and improved by maximizing the team that you already have, and then maximizing the location you're already paying rent for, whether you're open 18 hours or 32 hours, your rent's not changing, right? And then you got room capacity, right? So not only do you want to maximize the teams that you have, you want to maximize your space. So if you actually maximize all those spaces, based on this calculations, jump from 30,000 all the way to 99,000. So this is where, like I said, a lot of people think that they need a bigger space, but they're not actually maximizing the space that they already are paying rent for. So that's why this is so important to see where that gap is between your current actual number and your room number, right? Or your space number. And then again, not only that's just the room at the current 18 hours. Now, what if we take the rooms at the full 32 hours? Okay, now we say, holy cow, if we have this full room capacity and full hours, now we can generate $141,000 a week, $614,000 a month. Again, this is how I scaled a clinic to $5.5 million in 1,800 square feet, because I went through this exact same flow. I went through it. This is where I'm actually at. Okay, where's my biggest bottleneck? Usually it's maximizing your team members first and foremost. That's typically 99% of the time. That's going to be the number one thing that you need to maximize. You're already open for this many hours, but they're not doing these appointment types. So you need to maximize the schedule. You need to understand your marketing ROI, break-even points, which we talk about in other master classes. Okay, you know exactly how much you can spend to acquire a new patient to maximize this schedule for day ones, day twos, and all these other appointment types. If you know that number and what that break-even point is, then you know exactly how much you can spend to maximize your schedule to go from where you actually are to maximizing your team capacity. Then, like most of the time, you're going to hit a capacity for team members, and maybe it's adjustments. Maybe it's you yourself as becoming the bottleneck because you're doing adjustments, day ones, day twos, re-exams, x-rays, all these other things. So, maybe it's not hiring another associate. Maybe it's because you're spending so much time on administrative duties, or you're doing a lot of these other secondary activities that a doctor doesn't have to do. And you have to figure out, I got to stop doing all these other secondary activities that a team member can do for $20 an hour versus me as the owner doctor, is spending my time doing those. So instead of needing more team members, maybe it's just a shifting around of priority or your time to delegating and elevating to your current team, right? Then eventually, if you do that well enough, then maybe you need to hire more CAs. You might not need another doctor at that point. And so again, it's just this continual, consistent evaluation. Like Adam was saying, this isn't it's going to go from zero, to multiple millions, changes overnight. This is continual evaluation where those bottlenecks are. Again, like I said, this is going to tell you exactly, okay, I'm at adjustment capacity. And that's where, like I said, maybe it's not a doctor, maybe it's your individual time. You're spending so much of your time, on maybe you have a lot of other activities that you're doing that are taking up your schedule that a doctor does not need to do, right? And so that's where you're really going to get into the nitty gritty of actually taking action based off of this. So that's most likely the next step. Like I said, is getting to your team member capacity first. Okay. Then as you're getting closer to your team member capacity, then you need to figure out, delegate, and elevate to open up more team member capacity for these actual activities, decreasing some of these secondary duties that are happening during patient hours, either shifting those to hours or cluster booking so you have less downtime, during those hours. And then you have a new capacity. Now you have a new team member capacity because you've reduced those things. Now you need to maximize that. Okay. And then most likely you can delegate and elevate again, increase team member capacity, and then you're right back to trying to maximize that. And that's going to happen back and forth, back and forth. That's going to happen a lot. Okay. Before you ever need to increase your hours. Okay. Before you ever need to increase your space. Okay. That's going to happen back and forth, okay, with the same team members you have. All right. Then you're going to be like, okay, we're humming. Our team members are efficient. They don't have downtime tasks during the shift. Okay. How do we maximize the space that we already have better? Okay. Now you're going to jump over to maximizing the space that you already have. Okay. As best as possible. Maximize space, maximize space, maximize space. Okay. Now we actually have team maximized and space maximized. All right, now we probably can get, now it's probably still a team that can be increase your team, and then you might have to start increasing your hours if your rooms are all maxed out during the hours that you have. Okay, and so that's why I said this isn't one size fits all, but I would say most of the time this is what it's going to be: is maximizing team, maximizing team, maximizing team, maximizing team, maximize room, maximize team, maximize room. Okay, now finally we maybe need some more hours. Okay, and then finally we maybe need a new bigger space. Okay, so that's really how you have to think about it. It's just like anything, it's the basics. Success is doing the basic things, the basic boring things with consistency. That's how you become successful, is just getting really good at doing the boring things over and over and over and over again. All right. So
if I can just add one thing, Dr. Zai, if you go back to the Google Sheet, when you're in here, you play around as much as you can. You can always undo things and go back to previous versions. You can make as many copies as you want. If you scroll down, there's just a simple little two graphs that tell you, well, in this, you'll see in this graph, in this example, we're operating at about 87% capacity. Team member capacity is at 87%. So we're currently at about 87%. And we are losing about $110,000 in potential revenue because of that. In the last one, we're operating at about 22% capacity compared to what we could be, and we're losing $481,000 of potential revenue because of that. And this will be yours. You're going to put the numbers in. Again, don't worry about exact science. If you even get it 80% right, you're going to get a stark reality of what is actually what are you actually capable of doing in your practice. And then the one on the right is just how many slots do you currently have, and slots are a little bit of a it's a hard number because it could be a 15-minute slot, it could be a 5-minute slot, it could be a 30-minute slot, but it's just the total quantity of slots. And then again, what is the actual potential revenue? So in this example, this practice could make $614,000 and it's only currently making 132. So there's this massive difference just using this little example, and you can then see that for yourself. So you put your numbers in, you put your reality in, you play around with it, you can make 100 different versions. It doesn't matter. You use it to start to see where's the ceiling, where's the real ceiling? Because if we understand where the ceiling is, we're going to start to create good plans to get there.
I love it. Yep, I love it. Yeah, like Adam said, yeah, you can look at the slots, percentage of slots filled, percentage of time filled, and so forth compared to your actual. Like I said, that's the most basic framework I talk about all the time too. Is like my definition of scaling. Is understanding your capacity, maximizing your capacity, increasing your capacity. You know what your capacity is, okay? Then you work to maximize it as best as you possibly can, okay? And then once you hit a capacity limit, then you need to increase your capacity. Again, it's team, space, or hours. Most likely it's team, okay? Hours, team. hours, team, maybe finally space. Okay. So that's all that it is. That's, like I said, scaling is simple. It's boring. It's just consistently understanding what those data points are so you can make the best decisions. So at the end of the day, like I said, you got to define, where do you want to go? What stage are you in? What stage do you want to be in? What's your target for your numbers? What's the ideal hours that you need to be? What things do you want to give up? Do you want to give up adjusting? Do you want to give up sales? Do you want to give up marketing? What things do you want to delegate? What do you love to do? What do you feel like you're the best at? What is your ideal sweet spot that you want to end up for, at the end of the day? This is your practice. This is your world. Don't try and be me. Don't try and be anybody else. Be who you want to be. Live your own life. I mean, that's something that's so important, is not consistently comparing yourself to, comparing what you want to be to someone else's dream, right? Figure out what you want, figure out what your own individual goals are, and let's map out a plan and goals to accomplish that.